going, guys?
We're just
How's it
talking.
going?
We're just bullshitting right now.
That's pretty much what I was doing.
Mark, this is
What's
Steven.
up, Steven?
What's up, Mark? How you doing, man?
Mate.
Yeah, living the dream.
Yeah. The by dream you mean nightmare, then yeah.
Yeah, that's what I tell people, man. I'm living the dream, surviving the nightmare.
Wait a minute,
How was your meeting?
I like your background.
Thanks.
Oh wait, let me change
Yeah, I think
my
yours looks a little more. Oh,
well, I have a media company. I better do something that looks halfway decent. Oh wait, here you go. I'll do this instead. You ready? How about this?
Silly sentiment.
you gonna play it? Oh, why won't it play the whole movie? Oh, there it goes. There it goes.
Yeah, this is gonna do the whole
We're just gonna sit here and watch
thing.
Who?
Everybody remembers seeing clips of that online somewhere.
I don't think ours does that.
No.
Got to use OBS, Open Broadcast Studio.
What's a what?
Huh? Use OBS. It's
Yeah,
free.
because I've got
Write that down.
OBS is free.
OBS.
Yep, and if you need help learning it, it's pretty straightforward. I can teach you how to learn it. You can do like really cool stuff with it. Yeah, like I'll have like stuff switching up like crazy and but not this time. I got everything on the other system over there on the other side of the room, so I'm just keeping it like this for now. But
yeah,
it's cool.
We'll have to do
Yeah,
that.
that's Shag Harbor in the background. And this is
Your screen
iced tea.
keeps freezing. Now you're back.
You got it.
Yeah, this is not iced tea. Starbucks.
Yeah, that's it.
Poison.
That's it. Starbucks.
Expensive poison.
Oh boy.
So I'm excited to be on the very first one. You're actually at episode 2, but she's not filmed yet.
Okay. Yeah, I'm
She's
excited.
gonna.
So
I don't know. I'm kind of nervous.
I'll talk about weird stuff.
Do it. I think Steven would like to hear about all the weird stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can run me down as many rabbit holes as you want.
Oh, he will.
I've lived in a couple of haunted houses. Had some weird stories.
You gotta talk about that for sure.
I've seen firsthand, not to be like what is Zach, where Zach always gets possessed, he's on Ghost Adventures.
Yeah.
I've actually seen firsthand 2 demonic possessions, and one of them I actually helped out, and people said, "Oh, you should have been an exorcist," and I was like, "Nope, not for me. I just did it because I had to." I couldn't imagine. Yeah, I couldn't imagine like when people do that stuff and they're praying over people for rites of exorcism for like 12, 15 hours straight. Oh, it's fine.
Yeah, I don't know if I mentally could handle that.
No,
I got too much ADHD going on for all that. You might get 12, 15 minutes. And then after that,
they're out of luck.
There's right.
I'll leave you a picture of holy water. You just take a sip.
Right. You can try CPR, maybe, but yeah.
Let's see. You guys can hear me okay, right? Freezing a little bit.
I don't know. Her internet great. Yep. Let me try switching.
All right.
That might be the only issue with.
Yeah, I'm getting a thing that says Elizabeth Smith's network bandwidth is low.
All right, I'm gonna try something else.
A little bit. It's like
Better now?
Well,
Might
yeah,
just-
it's better. Now that I didn't hear what you said. It just I saw what you go.
So we might just have to go for it. See how it
All right,
goes.
well, we'll work around it.
So what's your background? What's a little bit about you?
Oh my God.
Not a little
Personally,
bit.
I've been in technology. I'm a military veteran. I've been in technology for a lot of years. I started out as a mechanical designer for Union Carbide, so I have a really extensive background in science and technology and so forth. Now, as far as paranormal stuff goes, I was one of those kids whose mother used to get Fate magazine when I was little, and the other stuff that scared the crap out of other kids, I was all into. So if it was anything about cryptids, UFOs, ghosts, I couldn't get enough of this stuff. And I think it kind of shows because I've lived in some pretty interesting homes, unfortunately.
Mm.
Let's see.
So what do you,
What's that?
I'd say, what do you do now currently?
So now I have a company. I still work for Pinellas County government. Um, in Florida. But I also started a company called Phase 5 Media. So there's a lot of stuff going on around Phase 5 Media. So I still have my Dark Doorway brand, which is I started out as a podcast and now I'm working on like documentaries and things like that. But Phase 5 Media was the media company that I used to wrap it all up. But Phase 5 Media actually encompasses a lot of different stuff. So it's not just, paranormal content. It's, advertising. It's, when people need programming done for web or for broadcast, those are the types of things that we can bring to the table. So, and then me specifically being the owner, I function as a director and a producer, editor. I got bodies that work under contract when I need them to. We live stream performances and produce stuff for singers and comedians and things like that. So it's a lot of cool stuff going on. But what I'm looking forward to doing this year is getting out to some of the different Paracons and UFO cons and things like that, and bringing out my gear and getting some
Yeah.
really good documentary footage of all of the events and the people involved to broadcast that on my Phase 5 Media channel. I think people will find that stuff interesting because you have people that want to go that for whatever
Yeah,
reason can't attend.
I know you didn't get to get out to a bunch from last year, so
Oh yeah,
I know you're gonna take advantage of it.
last year was a hot mess. So yeah, we got summer around the corner. So I'm definitely going to be out this year big time. So it's gonna be a lot of fun.
Right.
So when people see me and I'm walking around with a camera, then I'm probably gonna be you'll get to show your faces if you want. You get to show your faces and wave hello to the communities and I think that's important too because from what I can see, there's a lot of disconnection, a lot of disconnects in the community and so forth. So, I think it's good for people to kind of see each other's faces a little bit more in not only a professional setting, but in almost a relaxed setting as well.
Mhm.
And I think it would mean a lot it would do a lot for people to actually see that instead of just, bouncing some messages on some Facebook groups and maybe, kind of random occurrences or random meetings when they pop up at different events and
Yeah.
so forth. So yeah,
Yep.
but I think it'll be pretty interesting content, to be honest with you.
Awesome.
And
So
I will, what's that?
what's that like when you like to film in the documentaries and like what different documentaries have you done? Because I think that stuff's like probably my favorite stuff to watch, man. It's like the real life documentary stuff.
I'm actually working on two content pieces. The only one I can really talk about right now is one that I'm putting together now, and it's specifically for Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, and then
Mhm.
that's really talking about the Kecksburg incident, which is Pennsylvania's Roswell. And the funny thing is, when you look at what happened to the in the Kecksburg incident, you had this object that appeared over the skies of Canada across multiple states, had stuff dripping off of it, started a couple of forest fires, came down to Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. The interesting thing about it is the witnesses in Kecksburg that actually saw this object, they described this bell-shaped object that had hieroglyphic type writing around it, which was pretty interesting. Obviously, the military and authorities swooped in very quickly and cordoned off the area. People were sworn to secrecy and told never to talk about this. That's you know, the typical stuff. But the thing that was so interesting about the Kecksburg incident was there was during
Yeah.
the end of World War II, you had Operation Paperclip, and that was, you know, where the U.S. forces went in and they tried to spirit off as many of the German scientists as possible. And as a matter of fact, like very famous one, Werner von Braun, you know, the father of the American space program, the Saturn V rockets, he was one of the scientists that was spirited away. Well, a lot of scientists kept talking about something that was called Die Glocke. It was a what they call Wunderwaffen or Wunderwaffen, I think, wonder weapon. Um, and the Glocke, what was interesting about it was it supposedly ran off of something they called red mercury. Um, they had something that was called the henge, and this device, they had a hard time controlling the device, number one. But there was a lot of rumors that came out like that this, you know, it was supposed to be this device that was going to win the war for Germany. One of the many devices they had that was going to win the war for Germany, because like was it the Wharton brothers or whatever, they had the flying wing and so forth. But anyway, this device was bell shaped and supposedly had the ability to traverse time, and it was something they were experimenting with. So was it about 20 years later? This bell-shaped object comes down in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, and it was almost like they knew it was going to appear, and they were waiting for it. And it was swept off, and obviously you can kind of guess what theories came out of all of that. Was that this was possibly Die Glocke.
Right, that just traveled through time and
So
wound up.
one of the many theories. I mean, you know, the obvious theories is that it's extraterrestrial. Other theories is that it was one of our weapons that, you know, was it was experimental weapon, and that's why we knew it was going to come down there, and we were just protecting our own secrets. But that doesn't explain the hieroglyphics or the hieroglyphic type um, text that was going around this bell-shaped object when they found it.
Mhm.
So if that's the case, then you have to say, well, what was the purpose of that text? Was it just purposely put there in case this thing was found to throw people off so they wouldn't think it was a U.S. government project? You know, who knows? You know, it's
Mhm.
the jury's still out on that one. So it's just
Like
it's
misinformation or something.
yeah. So the thing is, when you start digging into that story, there's literally a lot to unpack there. So, you know, I'm trying to, you know, track down people who are still around. Usually it's like a relative of somebody, you know, some kid who was there, some guy, not a kid, but some guy who, when he was a kid, he was like, oh yeah, my father was one of the first responders that were on the scene, and he saw it and he came back and told the family. So that'll be the interesting bits of information to track down. Now, there's been things on the Kecksburg incident. So the goal is to find new pieces of information, things that haven't come out in previous documentaries.
That's awesome. I bet that's a lot of fun, man. You look like you have a great time doing that.
Oh yeah.
Have you seen some pretty crazy like, UAPs and things like that?
You know, it's funny. I actually have. I can think of two incidents where I saw something that did not make sense. So, one time when I lived in Florida, and you know, Florida's like famous for UFOs. You have the Gulf, was it the Gulf Breeze, I'm having mind freeze. Yeah, Gulf Breeze, UFO flap. There's a very famous photo of a UFO hovering over a road that came out of it. But not too far, just north of that, where I used to live, was Northport. And in Northport, you have a lot of interesting things because you're very close to the Mayaca Forest, which is where the very famous Florida skunk ape has been seen multiple times. As a matter of fact, there's videos out on YouTube now that are very credible. But some of the things I saw, I remember one time I was with family and we were having this whole conversation about UFOs, and the person I was with at the time, her daughter was like, "Yeah, right, I don't believe in that BS, that type of thing." And we were going outside, and I don't know, I don't remember which one of us said it before. We were like, "Oh yeah, well, what's that?" And we looked straight up, and you saw lights in the sky. But the difference is like when you normally see aircraft running lights or helicopters or satellites, they're usually traveling in a straight line, right?
Mhm.
Helicopters can, they can move fore aft, left lateral, right lateral. I was in aviation when I was in the military. But the interesting thing is these weren't doing that. These things were doing 90-degree angles, and they were almost like they were playing in the sky. And the lights were way too high to be helicopters anyway. Helicopters have a max operating ceiling. They're not going to be way up in the upper atmosphere. The only thing that's going to be that high is going to be high flying aircraft like planes, and they don't do 90-degree turns. Satellites, they're constantly falling to Earth and moving forward at the same
Nope,
time, so
haven't
they're
seen that.
definitely not doing 90-degree turns. So that was one incident that was pretty weird because they were up there for a long time. Couldn't see any detail, just the white lights just bouncing. It's almost like they were playing, like kids playing in a yard or something. And I think one of the oddest things I've seen was to go back to that area at nighttime. There was two-lane highways, this I-75 north and south. And as you start getting closer to that area in Florida, when you're passing like Venice and all those areas, but 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, those roads are dead. You're the only car out there. And I was coming back really late at night, and as I was driving back, probably about 100 yards ahead of me, a super bright orb that like lit up the area. It appeared over the road in front of the car. Um, and you start wondering like, what the heck is that? And as I got closer and closer, it didn't make any sense because it's out in the middle of nowhere. It's pitch dark. It's not like it's a street light hanging over the road. It's just
Mhm.
there. It's just pitch
Yep.
dark. And just as I got close enough to where I probably could have, s- you know, had a good look at what it was, it went out. And that was it. I drove
Never
past
came.
I drove past the area, didn't see a thing. But it was bright. It was almost like if someone took like a motorcycle headlight and lifted it up almost like midway to the tree, like midway in the tree level. It's from the top of the tree to the bottom of the tree. It's almost like somebody lifted up above the road like that and was shining it right at me. That's how bright it was. And that was actually pretty interesting. So, and then I lost an hour's worth of time. No, I'm kidding. That part didn't
Yeah.
And it had a mark on your back.
I saw that on X-Files.
happen. I lost I lost an hour's worth of
Crazy.
time. I lost an hour's worth of time and I couldn't sit down for a week. So yeah,
I think they broke me.
Usually, and what about ghosts? Because I know we briefly talked about
Um,
that before. He's
so
kind of a skeptic.
so I wouldn't say I'm necessarily skeptic. I think that my prior religious beliefs probably lean me more towards they're not like people left laying around. They're probably more like spirits of some kind that don't come from like a human dying, you know?
Oh, when it
Like
comes to for ghosts, yeah, it's funny because I have obviously I have my theories like a lot of people do. Um, I had a buddy of mine who I was in the army with, and we reconnected after a bunch of years, and I haven't seen him in a long time, and it's a great time talking to him because we were buddies in the military, and we had probably been reconnected for maybe about a year, and then he found out he had cancer. Um, and it was
mm,
kind of sad because he was doing the treatments and everything, and at one point he thought it might have been a remission, and then it metastasized, so it was like all over. And I still have his text message, and he said, because I never deleted it, and he said, I guess this is what they call game over. And I remember saying to him, I said, look, I said, when the time comes, and I said, and that light comes for you, I said, go right to it. I said, I know you're going to want to visit your daughter and your family. I said, don't do that. I said, this is not where you want to be stuck. I said, go, I said, don't, I said, go right to it. I said, you don't want to be that lost soul that is hoping that somebody will understand that they're stranded and will try to cross them over. I said, besides, I said, you're going to a place where time doesn't exist as we know it. And I said, so it's not like you're going to be waiting 40 years for the rest of your family to get there. And I honestly, I think that was probably the best advice I could have given him. I do think that people do get trapped on this plane for whatever reason. Maybe they're afraid of they don't go into the light because they're afraid of being judged.
Mhm.
Maybe they don't go into the light because they feel that they have unfinished business. One of the things that does concern me, however, is this. I've caught EVPs and, you might get things on like, the SB7 and things like that. And a lot of times you don't really get the intelligent responses that you would expect. You kind of get these broken responses when you do. I mean, you'll spend time and you won't get anything. It'll just be static.
Yeah. Hours.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize, you kind of cut all that stuff out.
Yeah.
You get,
You
you
only
cut,
see the exciting stuff.
Right.
You say that for at
yeah,
least
yeah, you get
45
to the
minutes worth
interesting
of
stuff
footage.
because if you recorded people just sitting around asking questions in the dark with no response, nobody would
Yeah.
watch. But
Yeah.
the one thing that you
Right,
notice is
right, for hours, just hours.
yeah, but you also get these scenarios where the responses kind of make sense, but they don't fully make sense. And you would want to think to yourself that if it were me and I was dead and I was stuck there and I heard one of you guys come back to me and say, "Oh, what is your name?" And I said, "Mark." And then you said, "Oh, well, what happened to you?" And I said, "I died." It is it that I mean, is it that that spirit really has that much trouble getting the energy to communicate, or after you're bound to this plane when you shouldn't be, do you start to actually lose your faculties? Like
Mm,
you're not as sharp as you are, like not how we are now, we're very cognitive of our situation.
mhm.
Then maybe you're into a situation where you're not fully yourself,
Mm,
almost like a person with the onset dementia where you can't really answer the
Oh.
questions fully. And I
Mhm.
wonder if that's the case. Or is it a scenario where a part of you has moved on and a part of your energy is still here, you know?
mm.
Um, so it's one of those things where there's only one way that you're going to find out. It's when your time comes to transition
Right.
over, that's when
And
you'll
nobody
find
ever
out.
comes back to tell you.
Yeah, well, no, not exactly
Yeah.
true because, well, not from this earthly plane, but there are people that have near-death experiences, and
Now, see,
Yeah. Which,
I do find that stuff like super intriguing. Like I've watched some little, I mean, they're YouTube documentaries and different videos of people's experiences, but it's so crazy because I have this theory that like, okay, if hell is real and it really does exist, and these people talk about like going to hell, but every one of their experiences in hell is different. It makes me wonder if like that's personalized just for you, you know?
yeah, I mean, think about it this way, right? When people have encounters with negative entities, right? A lot of people seem to have their worst fears
Right.
manifest in front of them. You know what I mean? Like some people will see like a devilish type character, some people will see, a big spider or creature or something like that. So,
like the thing on Harry Potter.
oh yeah,
What was that thing called? You know, out of
we
the closet.
we talking about the Dementors
Oh
or
yeah, yeah, becomes their worst.
Right.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
No,
Yes.
yeah.
no,
No.
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 It was during the class. Yeah. So kind of like that.
Yeah, exactly.
I had a weird experience in the hospital like that,
Mhm.
and it tripped me out like for a long time. Like I thought it maybe it was because they had me on so much drugs, like because I was really sick. But I remember my mom and them like they thought I lost my mind. Like they had a priest come up there and all this stuff, dude, because I started seeing like demons and all kinds of ghosts in this hotel room, dude. And it went on, I think, for like 2 or 3 days. And then one day I just woke up fine.
All right, so here's the philosophical approach to that. was it a fever dream, or was your mind actually in a different, either an altered or compromised state to where you're actually able to see things that would normally be behind the veil to you?
No, so I'll say this. I've questioned that, right? Because when I feel like when you're hallucinating and things, like you might see something, but nothing's gonna talk back to you. You're not gonna hear, verbal and vocalization, right? But this thing, what really tripped me out was like whenever hospital staff was getting ready to walk through the door, it would like look at me and go, and then step through the wall, and then the door would open. So it was like it
So
knew they were coming, and it would be like, don't say nothing, and go out. And I kid you not. And then they would come in, and I'd be tripping, like, terrified. And they didn't believe me. And they would shut the door, and it would come back, and it would stand there at that door just the entire time, man. It tripped me
yeah,
out.
I'm willing to bet that that wasn't a hallucination. Hospitals are notoriously haunted. But just like just like I might be in a hospital, I might not see a single thing, you know. When people are in compromised states of illness to where it might affect them, maybe under states of medication, anesthesia, partial or coming out of anesthesia, then I think that you're more susceptible to possibly see things that normally people wouldn't see. And yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of stories about hospitals, especially with these like dark entities that either scare people or they come to collect souls or whatever you want to say they're doing. But there's yeah, and think about this because when you mention about hell, um and I've had this discussion with other people too, and these were just going back to, if you look at if you go back to antiquity and you look at, for example, ancient Sumeria, right? Sumerians told stories about the Watchers, and if you look at their story, which goes far ahead, it's far older than Christianity. There's actually some very strong parallels in the origin stories. And in the Christianity, you had the Watchers, you had Lucifer and so forth, but you also had scenario when you look at, for example, the Garden of Eden, and they say, Eve, she bit the apple, she gave some to Adam, blah blah blah. We all know the story, and I believe the apple is a metaphor for knowledge, and we sort of lost our innocence at that point. And a perfect example of that is because one of the very first things that they noticed after they partook of the apple was that they were naked, and they felt ashamed, and they covered themselves with fig leaves, and then they hid in the garden when they heard God calling them. I think that there's some interesting things about that story right there, because if you have an all-knowing, all-powerful God, why would you be able to hide from him? So I
Mm-hmm.
think that there's a bit of probably confusion with the story, because it was obviously told by prophets and so forth. So there was obviously some confusion in that story. But in either way, the part that's interesting about all of that is, I'm sorry about that. The part that's interesting about all of that is the common thread is you had these watchers, and they were cast out because they either, like in the case of the Sumerians, they gave us knowledge we weren't supposed to have. In the case of Christianity, we lost our innocence, right? And one of the things that I always found interesting too was sometimes you have these when you have somebody who's like a really good psychic medium, and they seem to be onto certain areas that have negative impression, or these negative entities. It's always the same thing. It's like, well, they really hate people, they hate the living, they hate humans. And then you have to ask yourself, if there are these entities that are bound to this plane and they're no longer allowed to ascend because of their interactions with us, and we can't even forget that they found human women attractive, and then they gave birth to these demigod type beings called the Nephilim. I mean, we all know the David and Goliath story.
Bunch of giants.
Yeah. So, and then there's, six fingers, six toes, red hair, blah, blah, blah. So you got to ask yourself, if this is the case and they were compelled to never be allowed to leave this place, to be in existence here, then could you go back and say that in a sense that Earth is actually hell? That other plane of Earth, behind the veil of Earth. In other words, if you get stuck here, and this is just a personal belief, if you get stuck here, then you're being stuck in a place where you really weren't meant to be stuck at. And you may find yourself at the mercy of energy vampires and these other things that are really, really want to drain your life force because they literally hate you. You're being blamed for the reason why they're stuck here, you know?
Mhm.
And that would also fall into a lot of the other stories that you hear, whether you call it lore or not, where they want to condemn your soul to this place. They want to get you to do um, things that lower your vibrational energy so that way you cannot ascend because they don't want you to be able to ascend. And one of the ways to get you to be able to force you to stay here is to put your mind into a state where you're doing the things that would be considered unclean, whether it's, murder, crime, treating your fellow human being like crap. You know what I mean? Just being a foul person. And then once you're at that point, then you can't ascend, and then you're at their mercy for real. It sort of reminds you of the people that they sin and then they're in hell, but they really haven't gone
Mhm.
anywhere. They're just here, but on the other side of that veil. So just a personal theory,
See,
belief.
I got really into all of what you're talking about there for a while, and I noticed like a lot of similarities, like what you're saying. So like, like you said in the Samaria or whatever Samaritans, it was the Watchers and things like that. Same in the Old Testament, and then and like like you said, I theorized that the forbidden fruit was knowledge because they gave us forbidden knowledge.
Yeah.
So like even in the book of Enoch, when it talks about like how they taught us how to make
Hmm.
weaponry, cast spells and do
Fire and
makeup and
tools. Yeah.
right, you know, and all that stuff. But then you go somewhere else on the planet, right, to like Greece or something, and they have the ancient Greek gods that ascended from Olympus and came down here and intermingled with humans and actually bred with them and created demigods and
Hmm.
all these things. So I always had this theory that what we know as aliens are actually the same things as these watchers.
Hmm.
So in theory, anything that's not from Earth is an extraterrestrial. So if these things are from a completely different plane and they are here, they're extraterrestrial, which would make them aliens.
Yeah.
And it could be them that messing with
Yeah.
us and following us around.
I think you're dealing, you have different classes. You have extraterrestrials and you have interdimensionals, things
Right.
that can travel from another state of existence, And I always thought it was interesting too, like when you look at these things, like, you know, let's look at your average human being. We're beings of emotion, right? We have happiness, we have empathy, we have, hate, anger, jealousy, you name it, we display all these emotions. Now, one of the very critical one of the very critical things that we possess is the ability to wonder and the ability to imagine creativity, right? And if you notice when people have scenarios where they like abduction scenarios, for example, when we start talking about aliens and things like that, one of the common tropes that you also see is that, like in the case of the Greys, you have the small Greys, you have the bigger Greys that seem to be in charge. You also notice that in cases like that, it seems as though they're very task driven. They're not emotional, right? We're here to do this, keep calm, nobody's going to harm you. People are getting harmed, they are feeling pain, but they seem to be very, it's not like they're like stroking it saying it's going to be okay. It's not that. It's more so like they're telling you what you need to hear to anesthetize you, anesthetize you, right? Um,
Right. We're like animals.
yeah, and it makes me wonder. I don't know if you guys ever saw the movie The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So a famous book, and they made him.
I started watching that the other day.
Yeah, it was with I forgot what his name, Martin Freeman or whatever, him and Mos Def. And it was a great movie. But in the movie, what it turns out was they were trying to answer the biggest question in the universe, and they had to build the ultimate computer, and the ultimate computer turned out to be humans, right? And at the end they needed their brain to to get the answer to this question. But it makes you wonder, if other races are very task driven. Think Star Trek, Spock, no emotions, just logic,
Mhm.
right? And they don't have the ability to imagine and wonder. If you can't imagine and wonder, then you can only formulate answers to questions that are directly in front of you. Like us, we can like look at a blank canvas, and then in our imagination we'll see a seascape, and we'll paint in sky and birds and all this other stuff. If you don't have that ability, then a blank canvas to you is nothing but a blank piece of canvas, you know? So maybe that's what sets us apart from a lot of these other races, is that we can dream things up, we can imagine, we can say, what if? We looked at things like the universe, we noticed that there was the background cosmic radiation, by examining the redshift. And when we did that, we realized that the galaxies were all moving apart from each other. So we said, if they're moving apart, then that means at one time, if you play that film in reverse, they were together. And then we came up with the Big Bang Theory. And these things all came out of imagination. And then by imagining these things, we had theories and scientific hypotheses, and then we had to go back and try to prove these things. Einstein said about the fabric of space-time, you know, and then people thought, impossible. And he's like, no, it was real. And then all of a sudden, we accepted the theory because it made sense mathematically. And then after he was gone, when they observed the sun during an eclipse, right? They saw a galaxy that was behind the sun because the light was being wrapped around the sun. That's called gravitational lensing. And that proved that space-time was malleable, right? And it proved Einstein's theory
Mhm.
after, posthumously. So these are all things that were dreamed up. Someone had to imagine and say, what if? So if that's the case, and there are other races, and they work strictly unemotionally, then we can do something they can't, which is we can imagine and say what if. And by doing that, we have the ability to look a little further and dream a little, and come up with solutions and questions that don't even exist yet. Now, the problem with that is this: through all of those wonderful gifts, we have the negative side, which is the need for power, greed, jealousy, anger. I don't like this person because he doesn't make as much money as me, or I don't like this person because of the color of their skin, or I don't like this woman because she's promiscuous in my opinion because I wouldn't do that. So you have all these negative feelings that can come out, and it's almost like, you got to take the good with the bad. So are they hybridizing with us to save their race? Are they hybridizing with us to try to get the best of both worlds? Um, are the Greys another theory? The Greys, another theory is that they're really us from the future. You know what happened
Maybe.
in Rendlesham Forest? They had when that at the Bentwaters incident. When they had that UFO, and Peniston touched the UFO and he saw that binary language in his head, and then when they decoded the binary language later, one of it said eyes of your eyes, and it said year was like 8120 or something like that. I mean, stuff that, really seemed like it was one of our pieces of hardware from the year 8000.
Now, that was, I think I'm thinking of the same thing. That was the military guy that was sent out to investigate the hovering craft,
Correct.
and him and two other people maybe, but he's the only one that touched it,
Yeah, he
and he
actually
started seeing numbers, right? A bunch of numbers and coding in his head.
and the crazy thing was, he remembers touching the vehicle, but his colleagues in the military said they don't remember that part. So it was almost like, if it went down exactly the way he said it did, Jim Peniston really had no reason to lie about it. But if it went down exactly the way he said it did, then that's your classic, time slip right there. He touched it, he remembered it. The time on his watch was different from everyone else's, and he experienced something that they didn't, but they seem to have they don't recall him doing it, but he does recall doing it. So those are all that's like pretty compelling stuff. And like I said, they've been pretty consistent with their stories through the decades. So it's not like when somebody tells a lie and they got to go back and they're over time things kind of get sketchy and so it was a pretty interesting revelation when it said eyes of your eyes. It said something about for planetary advancement or something like that. And it actually said year 81 something or other, and then it pointed out multiple locations around the planet. It gave you latitude, longitude of multiple locations around the planet. I think it was Great Pyramid of Egypt, and I think there was some other places that we look at as mystical locations or high energy locations along ley lines. And then one of the areas, the most mysterious areas, was a fabled island, High Brazil.
Hmm.
So yeah, it it makes for a very compelling story. It's
Hmm.
and you'd have to go back and say, all right, let's say for the sake of argument, this whole thing is a hoax and Peniston made all this stuff up. That's a pretty intricate thing to make up.
Right. And why would you want to ruin your reputation? And it seems silly to just to come up with a story that's really not going to get you much.
Yeah, and then let's take the average person. And let's take the average Joe, right? Like, look, I've been in technology for like 3 decades. Somebody came to me and told me to make up a message in binary. I'd be like, huh? I would need like a translation utility to do it. So
Right.
this guy's not even he's not even technologically savvy like that. And then just to go back and have him write down a bunch of ones and zeros in a notebook. No,
Hmm.
I don't buy it that whole thing is just something made up because it came by late, like the whole notebook thing came back later on. you know. It wasn't initially revealed. And that was the
So what
skeptic's
do you,
argument, was that, oh, well, it must not have been really happened because he brought it up later.
what do you think about that Bob Lazar guy? What do you know
Man,
about him?
Bob Lazar is amazing because he first brought his story to why am I having brain freeze? um George Knapp. Okay, so George Knapp is out of KTLA Las Vegas, right? Award-winning journalist. Knapp was pretty young at the time, and Bob Lazar came to him and said, "Hey, I work at a secret base called Area 51." Now, here's the crazy thing: when this story broke, everybody thought it was called what? It was called what was it called? Wonderland, not Wonderland. They thought it wasn't real, you know. And then it turns out that this place was really there. It existed, just like Lazar said it did. Okay, so if Lazar's lying, that right there dispels everything right there. He said it was there and it was really there. Wonderland, right? He said it was there and it was really there. So people that say Lazar was a liar, well, no, guess what? He was right about that. The other thing was he said he was a theoretical physicist. He worked in an area called S4. Now, needless to say, the government, everybody said that was a lie. Let's be realistic. If this guy is working with exotic off-world technologies, why would they say anything to legitimize his story?
Right.
Okay, he said that he got his excuse me, he said he got his degree from was it Caltech, I think it was. I forgot where he said he got his degree, and then they said, "Oh, that's not true. He never attended." Right?
Right.
Yeah, yeah, but a lot of the things that he said that he did ended up being true. Like for example, when he said he worked in S4, and they tried to say that there's no such place and he didn't work there, someone smuggled a phone book out of Area 51, and guess whose name was in there? Bob Lazar.
Right.
So,
No, I did hear that when they tried to discredit his educational background, that he still had some like old documentation or something that showed that he actually did go there and he did take these classes. But it
and
was almost like they tried to erase him.
well, that's the idea. Like I said, they don't want to legitimize this guy. Um,
Hmm.
and even Knapp said that like he took him to these areas where he said that they were going to be testing these exotic alien technologies, and they saw the lights in the sky, they saw the UFOs. But what's really amazing about all of that is when you look at Bob Lazar, he talked about what was it, element? I want to say element 151, I think it was. He says powered by something called element 151.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. They said
Yeah.
he stole some of it from him.
Well, no, he didn't steal any of it. I mean, but what he did was he talked about it, and people they called BS because this doesn't exist, right? And then it was years later, someone
Mhm.
created it in a lab. So once again, he was legitimized. Um,
Right.
so he said that it was powered by this exotic element. Now, one of the things that he said that these UFOs all had basically three like I forgot what they're all like the equivalent of an engine. Like there's three of them in each one, and it was capable of moving the objects through 3D space or three across 3D axes like X, Y, and Z axis. Excuse me. But
Mhm.
he was. It's funny because even when you look at some old pictures of UFOs. I remember specifically, and I'll find it one day, a famous UFO photo. And this farmer or whatever took a picture of this UFO. But as the UFO was angling at the bottom of the UFO, you saw three globe, half globe type objects in three corners of this UFO, this circular disc. So you had one, two, three, moving it through 3D space. And then if you look at more recently, what do we see now? Flying triangles.
Right. That's
And
what I
what's
say. I've seen the triangle ones,
and what's at the bottom? What's on the bottom of each triangle? You see a light, a
the
bright
three
power
engines.
source in each corner of the one, two, three, each time.
Right.
I honestly think what the triangles are. I think the triangles are our modification of exotic technology. To be honest with you, because that seems
Because
more.
they resemble a lot of like the stealth technology that we have.
Yeah, that seems more like a human thing than because when you look at alien or alleged alien ships. Usually they were just round. They were saucer-like or they were crescent moon shaped or something like that. And the whole idea of that was, I think that they were more utilitarian than anything. They weren't really thinking something looking cool. That's a human thing to make something look cool. And that once again, that goes back to the whole
Right.
we have creativity, we have imagination. We just
Egos.
we yeah, we're going to kind of make things look like the way we want to make it. Like we're going to kind of think into it a little bit, you know? And whereas they just kind of make what they need, you know?
Mhm.
But I do think that that was a modification of exotic technology, which is why you have the flying triangles. But you have flying cubes and you have those giant pyramids too that people have seen, which is really bizarre.
Why do you think there's been, I mean, what was it? Oh, what year was that? 2016 when the government, I think it was in June or something, released the document saying that they finally acknowledged the existence of these craft and they just don't know where they came from or where they are, but it's not ours. Like, why do you think they would all of a sudden feel true and they've known about it this long? They've just kept it a secret, basically lied to everyone for decades.
It's like it's I think it's got a lot to do with the current state of culture that we're in now. I mean, everybody's walking around with a camera phone.
Right.
Everybody, back in the day, like I remember my dad had like an 8 millimeter camera, like those old type thing, put the cartridge in. And that was like I was like just being born when he had stuff like that. But when you have things like that, but now everybody's walking around basically with something to capture lights, things that unexplainable things like right now. I mean, we have, the reason why we have so many web shows like Slapped Ham and Nuke's Top Five showing ghosts videos of ghosts and UFOs and cryptids now is because everybody's walking around with something to record. So there's only so long that the government can keep denying the existence of things. Now, what
Right.
they did was they were kind of crafty about it. They said, "Oh yeah, there's stuff up there. We don't know what it is." They have yet to admit that it's, alien technology. And then you have people that are in denial and they're like, "Oh, well, that's got to be, it's got to be Chinese. It's got to be Russian." It's like, okay, well, it doesn't. None of that makes sense. You know, based on the world's current. Look, even if you look at DARPA, right, the Defense Advanced Research Projects, right. So even if you look at DARPA, DARPA is generally like 20 years ahead of the rest of the world, right? So even if that's the case, that's where you had the Aurora project, which is that one craft that that was rumored to do like 8 times the speed of sound. And people noticed the contrail that was like a series of explosions, because that's kind of the way that engine works. It's like a whole bunch of pow, 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 like explosions, and that's why it's so fast. But still, it relies on 2 things. It relies on aerodynamics. It relies on lift, and it relies on a jet engine.
Propulsion.
Right? Propulsion, jet engine, right? It makes noise. It breaks the. People see UFOs and they see these things zipping off and going from 0 to like 7 or 8,000 miles an hour without a sonic boom and without a sound, right? One of the things that I talked about when I said, yeah, I'm a huge fan of physics, right? And if you just think about like things being relative to you, I don't really think that they're moving. I don't think they're moving through our space the way we know it, right? Think about it this way. You've used Google Maps on your phone, right? So imagine if you're on Google Maps and you use pinch and zoom and you zoom out and
Right.
you're in your current state and you swipe to look at Hawaii, right? So you swipe, swipe, swipe to Hawaii. You haven't gone anywhere, but the map underneath you has moved like crazy, right? It's just spun. Now imagine if you were a tiny inhabitant of that
Right.
map on your phone and you looked up and you saw the vehicle that you were in. To the person on that map, you just shot off
Right.
in
It's
some
gonna be
direction at some impossible speed, and they're wondering how come you weren't turned to liquid inside of that craft that you were in. But to you, you just swiped the map. I think what they're doing is
right.
I think when you have these vehicles that can move either interdimensionally or have the ability to bend space, like the Star Trek, the warp engine, where they're warping space. I don't really think it's so much that they're moving. I think it's so much that they're moving space around them.
Right. And I think we talked about this the other night when we were going on rabbit holes, but that that was always my theory. Like they're not using a propulsion system, right? Because you would have some sort of jet trail or something that would be pretty prevalent and loud. So most likely
Yeah.
they're bending, space fabric and just kind of goes like that. It seems like they're going phew, really quick, but
Yeah.
to them, just a little step.
Yeah. Well, to them, they're moving space around them. To us, they just
Right.
shot off at 8,000 miles an hour. It doesn't make any sense. But
Right.
that's one of the reasons why they're not, that's one of the reasons why the forces of inertia have not slammed them against a wall and they haven't turned to liquid inside that spacecraft or
The
that
G
craft that they're in.
force just
Yeah,
turning everything
it's
into mush.
yeah, it's non-existent to them, and then it goes back to those 3 engines that Lazar talked about, being able to move yourself through across the 3 axis of space-time, and so, when you look at these type of technology and it's funny because there's an old, like, I'm big into thought experiments when it comes to physics, right? So there's a thought experiment. One way to think about it is this, right? There's a famous thought experiment, and one is that there's 2 astronauts in space, right? You and me, we're both in space, and you're way off in the distance somewhere, and I'm here, and I'm drifting towards you, right? And as I drift towards you, I come up to you, and then we sort of make eye contact, and then we pass each other, right? And I keep going in my direction, and you keep going in your directions, drifting along in our spacesuits. Well, if you remove the stars as a point of reference, so where we're just in this black void, the question is, am I drifting toward you or are you drifting toward me?
I
From
lost you there for a little bit of part of that.
I was gonna say, am I drifting toward, if the stars are gone, am I drifting toward you or are you drifting toward me? From
Right.
from my from my perspective, relative to me, I'm stationary and you're drifting towards me. But from
Right.
your perspective, you're standing still and I'm drifting towards you. So
Right. 'Cause there's no way to know. I mean, because doesn't like, I guess like if the everything in the Milky Way, right, is rotating and is we can see it from the black holes or whatever in the middle that it's a
Yeah,
spiral,
there's a supermassive black hole at the center of the Milky Way, and we're all orbiting around it.
right? And then that galaxy orbits around something with other galaxies that all move through space. So I always kind of wondered, like, we're probably not even in the original dark space that we started in because we've been moving through an entire universe all in sequence.
Well, we know for a fact that at one point everything was that there was a bang. Not for a fact, but the standing theory is that there was a big bang. And the reason why that theory exists is because we see the background radiation from the Big Bang. There was this massive explosion of energy. And then all of the matter and antimatter that exists in the universe today is a result of that. And everything is flying apart. At some point, the Milky Way will be alone. We won't see any other galaxies. All right.
Because it'll be
Yeah, because
spreading out from us.
everything's moving apart from each other apart from each other. But we do know at the center of every galaxy there's a supermassive black hole. So I think that's like one of the biggest questions now is where did the supermassives come from, right? But yeah, but if you kind of like look at all these different things, and it's crazy because when you think about that, this like just going back to the whole thing about aliens and multiverse and all, if you think about this, right? The Earth is what 4.6 billion years old, right? So if the Earth is 4.6 billion years old, and there are other planets and other star systems that are much older, why wouldn't we be getting visited? And then people go, well, I hate that old argument. They say, oh, well, if they're here, why don't they just land on the White House lawn? And I think about it, I'm like, let's say you're an alien race, right? And you visited Earth and you saw everybody at war with each other, just like for no good reason. Oh, this area's got more
Right. These people,
oil. This area has better access to the ocean, so we're gonna blow everything up so we can have a trade route to the sea. You know, and people aren't really like loving and respecting each other for just being alive and having the right to exist, and everything's about acquisition. When they back in the 80s used to say, "He who dies with the most toys wins," which is a horrible saying. You
right.
know, and I'm the first one to tell people, I said, look, I'm gonna tell you right now, you could take any random billionaire that you think is either good or bad or whatever you think of them. They didn't get that way by being a nice guy.
Right.
You don't get to be that rich by being considerate of others. You get that rich by stepping on everybody's hand on that ladder going to the top, right? So anyway, you're an alien and you see all this stuff. How much interaction would you really want to do with us?
Right. Or maybe we're just, the monkeys in the zoo that they come to
Yeah.
see and are entertaining. Oh, watch them. They're setting off fireworks.
Yeah.
This one's gonna wipe out an entire city.
Do you remember who was it that wrote the Mothman prophecies? The book was I think his name was John Keel. I think his name was
I
John.
remember the movie. I did not read the books, but I remember it with Kevin Costner or something. The
Oh
movie.
no, it was Richard Gere.
Richard Gere.
Richard Gere was in it. But they made a saying. They said a very famous quote in that movie, and Richard Gere was talking to the one guy who was like this expert on the topic, and he said, he was basically saying he told Richard Gere, he said, so you see the window washer up there? He said he can from where we're at, we can see up the street. He said from his perspective, he can see a little bit further down the street. He can see, and that was one of his points, a little bit higher up, so he can see a little bit further down the street. He can see a different perspective on everything. And then he was basically saying, because Richard Gere said, well, why don't they just tell us what they want? Why don't they just tell us what they need or whatever? And he basically said, well, he was giving a comparison of being intelligent. And he said, I think he said a cockroach. And he said they're fairly intelligent. So you ever tried to hold a conversation with one?
Right.
And,
Right.
and you know that I'm gonna have to look up that exact quote because I remember I used to know the whole quote in the scene, but
Hmm.
the whole point of that was you're dealing with something that is on a much, much, much higher level
Right.
of intelligence, you know? And I guess a way to think about it is imagine if you have your toddler. You have to speak very simple terms. Yeah, don't touch that. Stop, cut it out. Don't do that. That's the way
Right.
you got to talk to your toddler. You can't tell your toddler if you touch the stove, you're going to get a third-degree burn. Now to take you to the hospital, and it might be bad, and they might have to do skin grafts. He's going to look at you like, "What the hell are you talking about?" Right?
Just
But if
thinking
he,
about it, you wouldn't understand
yeah,
human.
but if he starts to touch the stove, and you go, "Hey, hey, don't do that," then they just,
Right.
you know. So maybe we're in a situation because you're dealing with something with a much, much higher intelligence. Their understanding of what our purpose is or what the purpose of the universe is way above our pay grade. So why would they try to explain it to us? We're incapable.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Well,
we're
human beings
probably
are just
incapable of
we
comprehending
tend
it.
to take. Yeah. I just think that you would it also seems silly to give something to some people that never do good with anything good they're given.
Oh yeah, you
Like
would.
it
Yeah,
seems to be a trait with the human race that like we got this new technology and it's going to make your life better, but oh, somebody's going to find a way to use it to hack people's bank accounts or bully people on the internet. You know, it's not
mhm.
actually going to be used what it could be used for. At some point it's going to be weaponized. Like,
Yeah. That's exactly it. People will find out, and you know the reason why is because there's always one person out there who feels I can use this to get other people to do what I want them to do. You know, and for no good reason too.
right.
You know,
I
for
mean,
no
it's
good
been
reason.
that way even with religion.
People have
Right.
weaponized religion.
I wanted to know. So I remember earlier. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's actually going to be my next question. So I remember earlier when you were talking, you had said that you had witnessed a couple of possessions.
Yeah.
So what was that like?
So yeah, one of them was man, it was horrible. One of them, you know, it kind of was it was misconstrued as a mental illness. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Which
like when
is
it,
which happens quite a bit.
yeah, when people say, "Oh, they hear voices or someone's talking
It's
to them," you know, we're real quick to say, "Oh, well, it's got to be schizophrenia," right? In this particular case, when it did happen, it ended in tragedy, and a person who was close to that person was the next person infected. And you know, it kind of jumped around.
oh.
There was actually three cases, and in the third case was we actually intervened. And like I said, I can't go into too much detail because it's like I said, you know, people like their
Yeah.
privacy, but we intervened and it ended up
Mm-hmm.
with you know, praying over that person um just nonstop pretty much. And you know, here's the thing when I say about churches, we went to like multiple churches for help at the time. One church they were just like, oh well, it's you know must be like mental illness. You know, now mind you, these are supposed to be churches, right? There's you know they're real quick to hold a hand out for donations and things like that, but when they have to actually engage in spiritual warfare, that's when you find out how legitimate they are. Um, then another church, no one was available, and then actually one of the churches that we went to at the time, the there was two priests there and like an office administrator, and the person zeroed in on one of the priests immediately, the infected person, and the infected person zeroed in on the younger priest and said something to the effect of, "Your faith is weak, and your God can't help you."
Oh,
Um,
that
and then immediately you know, said some other things, but those were the things that stuck in my head. And then immediately, and this is an issue of faith. Yeah, God can help you, but if you don't have faith, then you're kind of on your own.
mm-hmm.
And then that person immediately turned toward the office admin and looked at her and said, "You're sweet. I think I'll take you next."
Oh.
Um,
That's some scary movie stuff, man.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I actually have it recorded. It was pretty bad. Um, but ultimately they didn't help. But we did have one place where they actually gave us like holy water. But from there it was just literally intense praying. Until the situation was remediated. It was something I'll never forget. And it was funny because, like I said, it was somebody actually said they said, "Oh, you should be an exorcist." I'm like, "Look, I'll do whatever my calling is, but that I don't think that's my calling. I think I'm more.
Right.
I think that was more of a I had to help at the time, but
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
think I'm more of a record what's taking place so other people can learn
Yeah.
type of guy.
Now, have you ever seen any of the like really like I've heard the stories about they start speaking in Latin and multiple voices like talking at the same time.
No, but what this person's voice was, it was a very like a rough variation of their normal voice. It wasn't their normal voice. It wasn't their normal timbre. It wasn't their way that there was the mannerisms to speak. It wasn't even like a totally different person. And it's another thing too. Like so, things would have. They were saying things like, let's say for example, that person was around you and she's like, I remember when you were 5 years old and it was that rainy day and your mother sat her purse down and you took some candy out of her purse. Things that are super specific that no one could have known
I
but
Mhm.
you.
mean,
Nobody knows.
right,
Yeah.
Yeah, those
right.
those type of things, those habits, those are the things I've witnessed happen. Those things happen. And when that happens, that is a that is a major validation right there. When
Mhm.
someone say somebody, when something tells you about something that no one could possibly know but you
Just a
gotta,
memory. Yeah.
you have to start asking yourself some serious questions at that point.
Yeah, like maybe I should leave. Like maybe I should get out of here.
Time to go.
Right.
So we're gonna
Yeah, but
finish up
it's
on something a little here.
yeah.
So, uh, you've got something you want to ask me about?
Oh, you have a Bill Cosby obsession? Is that correct?
Oh my God. No, you know what that started out because here's this guy. And he was like, they called him at one point, they called him America's dad. He was super popular. He did so much for education. He had all of these like major things he did. And then you find out this guy is like the most horrible person on the face of the planet. He was literally a predator. And I'm
My
like, yo,
childhood
Selling
is a
pudding,
lie.
selling pudding to kids. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like,
you're selling Coca-Cola and pudding and you find out he's like a horrible, like he should have been locked up a lot sooner. And then, then people they sort of had that well, it was a different time. We used Spanish fly. Like, no, dude, you were drugging people and taking advantage of them. You should have been thrown under the jail.
right.
Under the jail.
Well, then they
So
let him out.
yeah, he should still be locked up. Um but it was just so stupid because this is a dude, he just looks so weird now. Because he's got like these glazed he's got these glazed over eyes and he just looks so horrible. And so
Yeah,
I kept using AI to make these stupid images of them, and I kept
needs
sending
to.
them to my kids to torture
I'll show him some of it,
He was
some of the ones you
hey,
made.
now
Yeah.
I'll give it to him. He was good in that movie Ghost Dad. I haven't watched it. I haven't watched any of his stuff really since all. I wasn't like a huge. Oh, I can't wait for the new Bill Cosby movie to come out. But
Yeah,
I do remember that Ghost Dad movie that he was in, where he died and he was a ghost and he went back to his family and he was trying, but his body was actually in the hospital under somebody else's name, so he had to get back to his body. It was weird, but it was a good one.
yeah. It was just so stupid. This guy, he made an entire career in show business, right?
Mhm.
And I remember, he had comedy albums out, because my dad had them and stuff like that. And then he did this special for HBO, and the special was like funny as heck. It really blew up. And because of the special, they gave him an entire TV series. And that TV series blew up and it spawned like some extremely popular spin-offs. He made the careers for like people like Lisa Bonet and all of these other people. And then like I said, then you find out that he should have been locked up a long time ago. He was a horrible,
Right.
yeah, he's a horrible dude.
Right.
And yeah, so it was just so, and it's just like now, it's kind of like a joke now because he looks so pitiful now.
Yeah.
He looks horribly, he
Some of
looks
these
horrible and
mad
pitiful.
he made with these videos. What was that? Taylor Swift was one of them.
Oh yeah, I kept doing, yeah, because I was like, it would look, because it looks horrible to see it with like all these like young pretty
Miley Cyrus.
celebs, and
Yeah.
so I was doing them, and and it was funny because I would send them to my kids, and they would just look at them like, ugh. That was like their reaction every single time, like, ugh. And then so I saw it was grossing them out, so I just kept it up. So and
Tradition.
it was so bad that like one time I was talking to my daughter and I said something about we were talking on the phone about something. I said, "Oh yeah," I said, "Before I go, I got one more thing," and she just said, "Is it Bill Cosby?" Don't send me any more Bill.
Oh yeah. I get
So,
the pleasure of seeing these too. So
oh yeah, I sent him Liz too. Yeah, so I'm a horrible person when it comes to jokes because I like make fun of stuff that you shouldn't make fun of, and
mm,
he's like a horrible person, so I believe that he deserves to be made fun of. And I think it's some, he's getting real old now. So I think the last set of ones I did was I did him as like a ghost
yeah.
in
Yeah.
like a haunted hospital.
Yep.
But yeah, it's funny. But yeah, it's
We
yeah.
should get him an invite to the Facebook page too. There's a lot of funny stuff on there too.
Oh yeah, I think I'll do that. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. The thing is, I just love to laugh and I love to smile. I think it's and honestly, it's funny because you know I can be forthcoming too. I suffer from depression, and it's a bitch some days. So like yesterday hit me hard. And a lot of people think depression is like you're sad. And I'm like, no, dude, it's not that. That's a small component of it. I said when you get hit hard, you feel like you don't want to get out the bed. Like,
Mhm.
you start questioning whether if the world is a better place without you. There's a lot of things that hit you really hard, even though you know that is not logical. You can't, get out of that. And then so you have to like
Take
real
it.
yeah, you have to like really do things like for me, I exercise, I get out, I try to get out as much as possible, things like that, get out with people. Um, but yeah,
The bears
it's
and
the bears, yeah, bears in my forest. But
we
yeah,
didn't I
so
didn't bring up the mace story. I didn't
oh
tell them,
my God.
but you can
The
tell us what.
Oh yeah, I'll tell them. So I was actually we were going to the Appalachian Trail. It was my son and me. So we're geared up and I got, I'm ex-military. I got, I'm like everybody, I don't know if it's Florida thing, Pennsylvania thing or whatever, because I live in both places. And so I'm geared up. I got my tactical gear on. We're gonna go for a nice hike and everything. And so where I'm at, you got bears. So I carried a bear mace, right? And I had it clipped on to my tactical belt. And I'm getting in my car. I got a Mustang, and like you
I'm
sit in a
laughing
Mustang, you
already.
sit kind of low. So
No, you didn't.
I totally forgot that it was clipped to my belt,
You
and
gassed
I
yourself.
I I got in the car, and as soon as I sat back in the seat, the seatbelt buckle in the inside, it hit the button or the lever or the depressor on the bear mace, and I'm looking over it, and it shot from maybe 2 feet away. It shot straight up into my face, and the
Ooh.
the car the car filled with that cloud quickly, right? So even though my son didn't get hit directly with it, he saw the cloud, and it was too late, and it had snowed out or whatever, and I literally pushed open the door and I dove into the snow, and he dove
Face
out on
plant.
the other side, and that was probably look at if
Uh,
anybody ever questions whether that stuff works, I can say it does because that was probably one of the worst experiences ever.
hey, I have to show you that
So
picture too.
you wouldn't want to do it again, is what you're
No,
saying. Like,
look at everything. Check this out. When you're in the military, you probably heard stories about the gas chamber. When you're military, you got to go through the gas chamber. Yeah, it was just like that. Everything shut down. I couldn't breathe. I ended up making it into the house somehow, and I went into my bathroom. My son was in the guest bathroom, and because he was visiting, and I'm just sitting there. I remember yelling at him. I said, "Keep your face under the water." And we just kept, just that's all you can do is just keep trying to rinse as much as possible, clear your eyes out and everything. And my throat, everything closed up. So I was like, that type of thing. And it took hours for that stuff to wear off. We were actually outside, no lie. We were outside in the snow, taking big handfuls of snow and rubbing it in our faces
I
for
bet.
relief.
I bet.
Yeah, that was horrible. But you know what? That's one of the experiences that you'll never forget.
Yeah, I've
And
seen
it's
them.
always the stories were like, you wouldn't believe it if I told you, but it always happens to me, or always happens to you, or always happens to this
Yeah,
guy.
Yeah, like I was
yeah.
like, man, I remember that time I maced myself and my son.
Dude, I tell people like I've got some really crazy stories, but the one that always gets people is like, yeah, so I remember the time I got the shit slapped out of me by a monkey. And people are like,
What?
no.
Wait, now you
Yeah.
can't wait, but you just can't say that and then move on. What happened?
so so I was in high school and I was on the wrestling team. And this buddy of mine, he transferred from another school. And after practice one night, he was like, man, you should come over to my aunt's house and see her pet monkey. Right. And so like my initial thought, right, is like, what is this? Like this guy set me up or something,
Yeah,
I'm from
sounds like you're getting punked.
right, something. So I'm like, all right, like I'll go. So we get there, we walk in the door, and there's this like dog kennel, dog cage. And in this dog cage is this monkey with a diaper on. Okay, I kid you not. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like he really has this monkey. I'm like, hey, I was like, is it nice? Like, is it cool? And he's like, yeah, man, go ahead. I was like, so can I pet it? And he's like, yeah, man, go right ahead. So I get close to the cage and I'm like, hey, little fella. And this monkey loses its shit, dude. Jumps to the front of the cage, reaches out, grabs me by the arm, yanks me in, and smacks me with its other hand, and then jumps back on the cage. And it's like, ah,
Right. So you did get set up.
Yeah. And I kid you not, dude, I couldn't believe it. It's like it happened so fast, and I felt like such a sissy afterwards. But here's the funny thing. So like, I don't know, maybe a few weeks later or something, if that, he comes to school, dude, and he's like mauled, like all over his face. Got like
Oh my gosh.
scratches, right? And so I'm like, what happened to you, man? He's like, man, my aunt let the monkey out. And it like had ran around this thing that she had all these knickknacks on and dumping them on his head and jumped on him and mauled him. It must have remembered it bringing people over to mess with it while he was in the cage, man. Yeah, he got his for instant karma or whatever. 3 weeks is all it took.
Oh,
Yeah, you believe that? I think that monkey's name was Maggie.
Oh my God.
Yeah, mean little shit.
Yeah, let me tell you, I wouldn't have a pet like that. Those things are dangerous, man. Ever since I saw that news story about that woman that got like her face ripped off by the monkey, by the chimpanzee, I'm like, all right, well, I would never have a pet like that anyway.
No, those things when they get mad at you, like they're not dumb creatures, and so they go for your appendages. Like for a woman, they'll rip their face because
Yeah.
they know that's how they attract the males, right? But then they'll start biting your fingers off because they know that's how
Yeah.
you eat. So they'll maul your
Yeah.
face to ruin your beauty, and then bite your fingers. So not only are you ugly, but you can't eat nothing, and nobody's gonna want to help you do it. So, like,
yeah, I'm
like,
not gonna sleep now.
Yeah, I mean,
right.
like, why even have a pet like that? Those things are
No,
dangerous, man.
there's no need.
Yeah, I mean, come on. People think when they see monkeys, they think of like old black and white movies where the monkey's wearing a derby hat, got like a
Right.
cigar in his mouth, he's walking around with like a cup, collecting change off of like
No,
off of like windowsills.
they travel in packs. Like you see them in videos, man, running through like India and shit. The market, people are trying
Yeah.
to hurry up and lock their stuff up because they come in gangs.
Yeah, ain't no freaking way I'll be doing stuff like that. I saw some video today. This guy looked like he was maybe in Canada or something like that. He's driving around. He sees a reindeer in the road. He's like, and you can tell he's clearly in the middle of nowhere. There's like a long road and like mountains, like 100 miles off in the distance, and nothing around him. And the wife is talking to him. He's like, hey, you want to move out the road? That type of thing. And the deer just kind of like looked at him. He's all quiet. And the guy rolled down his window. He's talking to the deer. And as he pulls by really slow, the deer went from being docile to suddenly ramming his tire.
Right.
And all you heard was, and I'm like, wait a minute, dude, you're out in the middle of nowhere. I wouldn't be messing with anything. I would have drove by that deer at like 150 miles an hour.
Right,
Mm.
right.
That deer
Non-stop.
would have had to move out of the way for dear life. Not deer. It would
Right,
have to move out of the way for dear life for real. Because there's no freaking way I'm gonna be. Hey, buddy. Hey, how you doing?
right.
Screw
I try
that.
not to. I find that 90% of accidents that are related to wildlife are just people's sheer stupidity.
Oh
You
yeah, heck
know,
yeah. Yeah,
like,
without a doubt.
and it's like, why would you mess with something that has the ability to permanently leave you looking different for the rest of your life in like a split second? You know what I
to
mean?
to permanently leave you looking different.
Right,
Yeah, and then how you gonna explain that? Like when it's like 10 years down the road and you're like you got like one eye up here and one eye down here and your mouth is like at a 40-degree angle and you're like telling people like, oh well, they had a monkey at their house and
right,
I decided I was gonna feed it Doritos. It's like,
I wanted
dude,
to
right.
hug.
what do you think was gonna
You
happen?
see, my buddy asked me to come over and check it out. You know, like I learned right then in that moment, you don't mess with wildlife.
It
You
was a
know,
big bag.
cats, dogs, cool. You
It
know,
was a
these
it was a big bag of Cool Ranch Doritos in the kitchen, and who doesn't like Cool Ranch Doritos?
right. That's how I had to.
Like, dude,
Oh
leave it
man.
alone. Yeah. Oh man, screw that.
Well, Mark, I appreciate you coming on here with us.
Yeah, definitely, man. Thank you so much.
Hey, no doubt. I'm always happy to run my trap.
Yeah, always appreciate your time for real
Yeah.
and your friendship.
Thank you so much for being here, for having me
Been
here.
a couple years now.